Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin.
The room smelled like old paper and furniture polish, cold, professional, suffocating. I sat at the far end of the conference table, hands folded in my lap, while the three of them, Vincent, Gregory, and Thomas, took up the side closest to the attorney. Typical, always in formation. My name is Clara Monroe. I'm 34 years old. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, above the little art conservation studio I've run for the last 8 years. Not exactly the empire-building career my brothers like to sneer at during family dinners. Not that we have many of those anymore. Vincent, the oldest, didn't even look up from his phone when I walked in. Gregory gave a little sniff, like he'd caught the scent of turpentine. Thomas smirked. His suit was probably worth more than the whole top floor of my building. "Ah, the prodigal caretaker returns," Vincent murmured without looking at me. "Did you manage to close the studio long enough to grace us with your presence?" I ignored him and sat down. No one offered a greeting. "She's probably hoping for hazard pay," Gregory said with a short laugh. "Living with Mom all those years? That had to come with battle wounds." They laughed. I didn't. I'd spent the better part of a decade making sure our mother didn't die alone or forgotten. Now she was gone, and they were already acting like this was a business lunch. Mr. Eldridge, our family attorney, cleared his throat. "If we're ready, I'll begin." The jokes stopped. Phones were tucked away. Money had a way of sharpening their attention. He read the standard clauses first, the legalese, the funeral reimbursements, the minor assets that had already been distributed. Then came the real matter. "To Vincent Monroe," Mr. Eldridge said, adjusting his glasses, "your mother leaves the 1961 Bentley Continental located in her garage, restored and maintained with her private funds." Vincent sat up straighter, then gave a smug shrug. "To Gregory Monroe," the lawyer continued, "she leaves the beachside condominium in Sanibel Island." Gregory raised his brows, visibly impressed. "And to Thomas Monroe," Eldridge said, "she leaves the family's investment portfolio valued at—" Thomas didn't let him finish. "That'll do." "And finally," the attorney said, looking at me, "to Clara Monroe, your mother leaves the Monroe experiments." There was a pause. I blinked. Eldridge reached beneath the table and slid a wooden crate toward me. Dusty, splintered, with Monroe Experiments stenciled in fading black across the top. Inside were stacks of worn folders, spiral notebooks, and what looked like broken electronics wrapped in linen. The silence cracked when Thomas burst out laughing. "Wait, that's it?" he said, practically choking. "A box of Mom's science fair rejects?" Gregory leaned over the table to get a better look. "Did she really give her the junk drawer?" Vincent smiled, slow and condescending. "She always was sentimental. Thought you might want her little hobby box, I guess." The laughter grew until Eldridge cleared his throat again, louder this time. "That concludes the reading." The brothers stood, gathering their new fortunes like goodie bags. Gregory clapped me on the shoulder as he passed. "Well, sis, hope you enjoy your wires." I sat there for a while after they left, staring at the crate. I could still see Mom's handwriting on the corners of the papers inside, messy and intense. I didn't say a word, but something in my chest, something sharp and bright, started to stir. By the time I hauled the crate up the narrow stairs to my flat, my arms were jelly. I kicked the door shut behind me and collapsed onto the floor, the box resting between my knees like it might spring open on its own. The space above my studio wasn't much. One bedroom, barely a kitchen, and a draft that whispered through the windows every night. But it was mine. And tonight, it was quiet. No clients, no deadlines. Just the crate and me. I pried the lid open with a screwdriver and was hit with the faint smell of soldered metal and old paper. Inside were layers of notebooks, manila folders, and bundles of wires wrapped in cloth. Everything was labeled in my mother's handwriting. Test cells, field feedback notes, MC series. It felt like a time capsule no one had ever meant to open. I shifted some of the notebooks aside and spotted something tucked along the inner wall of the crate, a thick envelope sealed in wax, with my name written in the kind of shaky cursive that had started showing up in her letters near the end. I held my breath and opened it. The letter was 6 pages long, 6 full pages of my mother's scrawled thoughts, diagrams, ramblings, and, at the very end, something that made my throat tighten. "Clara, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if your brothers were half as predictable as I suspect, they're laughing right now. Maybe already on a beach somewhere. Let them. They never believed me. But you always listened. Even when you didn't understand, you sat with me and listened. These blueprints are everything. 3 decades of work. I never stopped. Not when the funding ran out, not after the rejections, not even after the last university called me delusional. The Monroe cell is real. It works. The science is solid. The world wasn't ready. But maybe you are. Don't let them convince you this is nothing. It's everything. Love, Mom. I stared at the page for a long time before setting it down. My fingers found the folder labeled MC01 and flipped it open. The diagrams were neat, clean, even beautiful in a way. Labeled by hand in tiny block letters, arrows pointing to magnetic induction coils and miniature capacitors. This wasn't junk. It wasn't even amateur. It was structured, detailed, purposeful. I pulled out a thick stack labeled MC03, MC04 transition notes, and laid them across the floor. My heart was pounding, but not from grief, from something else, something alive and hot and terrifying. This wasn't just a box of parts, it was a map. I clutched the letter to my chest and let out a shaky breath. Maybe I hadn't inherited failure after all. Maybe I'd inherited a revolution. By the third night, I hadn't slept more than a couple hours. The crate had taken over my living room floor, papers layered across every surface. Couch cushions, coffee table, the floor near the radiator, empty mugs piled up near my laptop. I only left the flat to microwave soup from the corner store. Half the diagrams might as well have been written in Martian. I wasn't an engineer, and I hadn't taken a physics class since high school. But I recognized pieces. My mother used to ramble through late-night cups of chamomile, doodling magnetic fields on napkins, while I pretended to understand. Back then, I'd just nod and refill her tea. Now I was staring at equations I didn't fully grasp, but could vaguely place. She'd left footnotes referencing university studies, papers I pulled up and skimmed with a growing sense of disbelief. Microscale resonance, quantum coupling. Most of the research was still theoretical, speculative, even fringe. Yet her notes had moved past theory. She was designing around it. Some of the blueprints were stamped "rejected" in red ink. I unfolded one that made my stomach twist. It was a letter from HELIX Energy, dated 2006. We regret to inform you that your submission cannot be considered at this time. While your enthusiasm is evident, the described effects of the Monroe cell exceed the limits of known physics and are not grounded in commercially viable science. I found another from HELIX, written in even colder language. Incompatible with current infrastructure, they said. Speculative nonsense. I sat back on my heels and rubbed my eyes. They hadn't even entertained it. Then, just before midnight, I spotted it, tucked in a worn folder near the bottom of the crate. A blueprint labeled MC04. The paper was thicker than the others, creased but intact. The ink faded from years of handling. My mother's notes crowded the margins, but the structure was clear. A compact energy module, self-contained, with a magnetic pulse loop and something she'd labeled concentric coupling node. I had no clue what that meant, but I remembered it. Years ago, I'd walked into the garage and found her crouched beside a metal casing the size of a shoebox. Wires spilled out onto the floor, and she was muttering to herself, tightening a bolt with shaking hands. I'd asked what it was. She didn't even look up. "It's the core of everything," she'd said. "This could power a house one day, or a hospital, or a city." I'd thought it was just another dream. Now I wasn't so sure. I searched her notes and found one line underlined twice. Compact transfer through static architecture. No wires, no grid. I stared at it, my hands were trembling. She hadn't been building some quirky side project, she had been building a generator, one that didn't need the grid. No lines, no infrastructure, just pure, wireless energy. I scrolled through academic videos online, watched lectures on magnetic resonance, wireless field transmission. Some theories danced around the edges of what Mom had written down 15 years ago, but none went as far. They all stopped where she kept going, and yet no one had taken her seriously. I looked around the room, at the notes, the diagrams, the names of the companies that brushed her off, and I realized something with a strange sort of clarity. She hadn't failed. She'd been early. 2 weeks after the will reading, I was brushing soot off a century-old landscape painting when my phone rang. Unknown number. New York area code. I almost ignored it, but something in me, maybe the way my mother's notes kept tugging at the edge of my thoughts, made me answer. Hello, a calm professional voice replied. Is this Clara Monroe? Yes. This is Maya Sutherland. I'm lead legal counsel at HELIX Energy. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I set the brush down, suddenly very still. No, this is fine. I understand this may be unexpected, Maya continued, but our research team recently flagged a series of early patent filings associated with the Monroe name. Given some recent developments involving our wireless grid platform, we're conducting a review of prior art to ensure we're operating within legal boundaries. Prior art, I repeated, half on instinct, older patents or technical disclosures that may relate to current systems. In reviewing our records, the Monroe cell schematics appeared in surprising alignment with some of our architecture, specifically a design labeled MC04. I felt my stomach drop. Maya continued, measured and polite. I wanted to reach out directly before escalating to our IP division. Would you be open to a formal discussion? Perhaps we could review the materials in your possession. Depending on how closely the designs overlap, there may be significant implications in terms of licensing, royalty agreements, possibly joint development opportunities. I was frozen, literally holding a cotton swab with a dab of solvent on the end, like I'd forgotten how hands worked. I'm sorry, I said, but did you just say licensing, as in money? Yes, Maya said, her tone shifting slightly. More careful now, maybe even impressed. If the MC04 design we're seeing truly originated from your mother's filings, and if those filings predate our current infrastructure models, we may need to discuss retroactive licensing or acquisition. These could be multi-million-dollar implications, Ms. Monroe, possibly more, depending on usage footprint. I glanced at the workbench. My mother's MC04 schematic was still spread out, pinned under a paperweight. I'd been staring at it for nights, trying to understand its depth, wondering if she had really done something impossible. Now a stranger from a Fortune 500 company was calling to tell me it wasn't just real. It might already be powering half the Western grid. I'm going to need some time, I said finally. Of course, Maya replied. I'll email you a formal request. Please take your time, but I do recommend speaking with counsel. After she hung up, I just stood there in the middle of the studio, the silence pressed in, thick and unreal. I looked down at the blueprint again. Junk, my brothers had called it. But it wasn't junk, it was a match, and the world was already on fire. By the time I sat across from Malik Patel, I'd already rehearsed what I was going to say a dozen times. Still, I fumbled the crate latch like a rookie pickpocket and dropped half the Monroe cell papers on his desk. He didn't blink, just calmly helped gather the loose blueprints while sipping his green tea, like this was perfectly normal. Malik came highly recommended by a client of mine, a textile restorer who'd once been sued over a misattributed Picasso. Smart, ruthless, and ethical, she said. A rare combo. He glanced over the first schematic and raised an eyebrow. Your mom designed this? I nodded. He skimmed through the pages, pausing occasionally to mutter to himself. When he hit MC04, he stopped altogether, his brows pulled in. Then he opened his laptop and started cross-referencing something I couldn't see. After 20 minutes, he leaned back. Clara, this isn't a novelty. These are real systems. Her patents predate some of the biggest filings in wireless energy by over a decade. She submitted them, I said, to HELIX and others. I found the rejection letters. Well, they're about to eat their words, Malik said, because your mother's documentation is airtight. Clear development notes, working iterations, even early-stage testing logs. It's more than prior art. This could be foundational. My pulse was pounding in my ears. So, what happens next? He closed the folder and folded his hands. HELIX is already dancing around legal exposure. That lawyer, Maya, she wasn't just being courteous, she was probing. They know they're standing on shaky ground. If they're smart, they'll want to settle quietly. What's quietly? He smiled. First negotiation will be licensing. If they're using any part of the MC series, especially the core coupling mechanism, we start at 8 figures. I nearly choked. 8? Minimum, and that's just HELIX. I blinked at him. There are others? Malik nodded. 3 competitors in North America, at least 2 in Asia, and 1 European startup. All of them are using similar wireless transfer systems. And guess what? Every single one of them filed their patents after your mom's. I stared at him, stunned. My whole life, I'd heard my brothers dismiss her work as obsession. But what if she hadn't been chasing ghosts? What if she'd been running ahead while the world dragged behind? Over the next few weeks, Malik handled everything: patent reviews, legal filings, the digital handoff of the Monroe schematics. I signed documents I didn't fully understand, while he walked me through every clause with patience I didn't know lawyers had. Then one day he called me while I was varnishing a canvas in the back of my studio. "It's done," he said. "What is?" "The licensing deal." Helix folded quick. "First offer landed at $22 million. You're officially the patent holder on the MC series, and they're paying you to use it." I sank onto the nearest stool, brush still in my hand. 22 million. It didn't feel real. Not yet. I thought of my brothers driving their Bentley, vacationing in that condo, watching their stocks climb, and then I thought of my mother, hunched over a shoebox-sized prototype, whispering about revolution to anyone who would listen. "Are you okay?" Malik asked. I smiled slowly. "Yeah, I think I finally am." I was reorganizing some old solvents in the back of my studio when my phone lit up with Vincent's name. It had been months, long enough for them to forget I existed, until apparently I didn't. I answered, bracing myself. "Clara," he said, like we were lifelong pals catching up over brunch. "Hey, I heard something funny today. One of the interns at Helix was babbling about this Monroe patent thing, and I thought, wait a second, I know a Monroe. Crazy coincidence, huh?" I didn't say anything. Vincent cleared his throat. "So, I figured I'd check in, see how you're doing. Heard you've been busy." I could practically hear him digging around the edges of the conversation, trying to find an opening. "I'm fine," I said flatly. "Well, listen, if Mom really had something valuable in that box, and it's getting used now, by Helix no less, then I guess we all kind of hit the jackpot, huh?" There it was. I leaned against the cabinet. "We didn't all get the crate, Vincent. You got the Bentley. Gregory got the condo. Thomas got the investments. That was the deal." "Sure, but if what she left you ends up being worth something, then we should probably talk about splitting things up fairly, right?" "Fairly?" I laughed, low and bitter. "She left me what no one else wanted. You all made jokes and walked out. Now you want to renegotiate?" "She didn't know what it was worth," he said quickly. "And neither did you. It's different now." "You're right," I said. "It is different, because I read every page, I filed the claims, I hired the lawyer, and I made the deal. And do you want to know what that deal was worth?" He hesitated. "How much?" 22 million. That was the first one. There was silence on the other end, then the tiniest catch in his voice. "Wait, what?" "You heard me." He exhaled, long and slow. "Well, I mean, I think we should really talk about this. Maybe the will could be challenged. If it didn't account for the potential." "No," I said, firm now. "Don't bother. You got what she meant for you to have." So did I. "You're really not going to share?" "I already did," I said. "Years of my life, staying with her while you all disappeared. I shared everything back then. I'm done now." The tone in his voice shifted. Less brother, more threat. "You know, if we can test the distribution—" "Go ahead," I cut in. "Challenge it. I've got legal representation you can't afford and documentation you never thought to look for. Let me know how that goes." Another pause. Then, "You've changed." "No," I said. I just finally started listening to the part of Mom that none of you ever heard. I hung up before he could answer. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of them. I was free from them. The house wasn't big, but it had a slanted attic with wide windows and a quiet view of the mountains. That's what sold me. I pictured sunlight pouring over my mother's old schematics, spread across a long oak table. I imagined turning it into a lab she would have loved. By the end of my first week there, the attic was transformed. The crate sat in the corner like a reliquary. The blueprints were filed in archival sleeves, labeled and cross-referenced. Her handwriting was everywhere. Little notes on envelopes, coffee-stained corners of paper. I'd framed her letter. It hung beside the door. Money had changed things, of course. The studio was still open, but now I had a manager, 2 new assistants, and a backlog of restoration work I could choose to ignore. More importantly, the first royalty checks kept arriving, and they were larger than anything I dared imagine. That's when I started the Monroe Initiative. It began with one grant, $5,000 for a woman in Idaho, designing a hand-pumped filtration system that worked without electricity. A week later, I funded a high schooler in Atlanta who had rigged a cheap solar array to charge insulin coolers in rural towns. then another, then 5 more. The requests started coming in steadily, through the website, through word of mouth. Not everyone believed, but the ones who did, they were brilliant and brave and a little strange, just like her. Meanwhile, my brothers were imploding. Gregory's condo investment turned sour after a hurricane wiped out half the block. Vincent's startup, some app that redefined productivity, went belly up when his partner fled the country. Thomas was in the middle of a divorce and liquidation battle that made headlines in the business section. I didn't gloat, not really, but I noticed the change in their messages. First came the excuses. Just checking in. Hope you're doing okay. Heard about the patents? Congrats. Then came the apologies. I never meant to laugh at Mom's work. We should have listened more. You've really done something special. I read them, sometimes twice, and then I archived them. I didn't need closure. I already had it. Instead, I spent my nights curled up in that attic with a cup of tea and Mom's old audio journals playing through the speakers. She recorded dozens of them, rambling into a clunky voice recorder about theoretical coupling, magnetic fields, and whether pigeons could feel EM shifts. Some of it was gibberish, some of it made me laugh, but all of it, every oddball minute, mattered. I understood it now. She hadn't left me scraps, she left me her life's work. Her hope. A few weeks later, I found a note tucked in a pocket of a leather-bound notebook labeled Unfiled. It wasn't dated, just a single sentence in her usual scribble. If anyone ever understands this, it'll be Clara. I sat there in silence, my throat tight, the sun spilling over the pages. She hadn't left me last. She'd chosen me first. The latest quarterly report arrived in my inbox just after lunch. I didn't rush to open it. I knew it would be another absurd number. When I finally clicked it, the figure blinked back at me. $14.2 million. Licensing, royalties, consulting rights. I leaned back in my chair, letting it wash over me without reacting. After a while, the numbers stopped feeling real. What felt real were the messages in the other folder, the ones labeled Monroe Initiative, submissions. There were hundreds now. A 16-year-old in Phoenix building a collapsible wind turbine. A mother in Mississippi working on a water purification system that ran on compressed air. An immigrant engineer in Ohio designing a battery-free cooling unit for disaster zones. Their schematics were crude sometimes, unfinished, impossible, exactly the kind of ideas my mother would have adored. Each time I read one, I pictured her. Hair wild, hands full of graphite, explaining something impossible to me over tea and toast. In the center of my attic lab, behind a sheet of glass, sat the original MC-04 prototype. The casing still bore her handwritten label, smudged and curling at the edges. Monroe Cell, Final Test Config. The thing that changed everything. Sometimes I caught myself staring at it for too long, not because I didn't believe it anymore, but because I still couldn't believe how close the world had come to discarding it forever. To discarding her, I stood up and walked to the case, rested my hand on the glass. "You were right," I whispered. "You were just early." It didn't matter that they laughed at her, that they rolled their eyes, that they called her work a waste of time. It mattered that she kept going anyway. And now, because of her, because of a dusty box no one else wanted, the world was finally listening. I was no longer the overlooked sister. I was the steward of a quiet empire, and I was just getting started.